What are some trends that, as parents, as a parent of a middle schooler or as a church, that we may need to be aware of to try to address to help us effectively reach this student culture population?
Right. Well, you know, every generation of teenagers seems to have their own values, their own understanding of the world and how the world works and how they're supposed to live out their place in this world. And us, as kids of the 80s, teenagers of the 80s, you know, we had our mindset. And now I look at teenagers 20, how much years are we later now? 20, 25 years later. They're so much different than the way we were. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times as parents, we have almost bent our hearts toward hearing the negative things about youth culture, and we see all the stories of, you know, violence in the schools and things like that, and so we have this idea that just things are horribly bad with teenagers. But I think there really are some good things going on in this generation that really weren't happening that much with us.
Okay.
I mean, if I could illustrate with this board here, can you help me out here?
Sure.
I mean, think about this. When we were, you're going to remember my Vanna?
Vanna.
Well, there you go. I'm pretty sure she has a few more hairs. Here's, think about us back in the 80s, which would include, you know, most of us, right? So we got the generation of the 80s, and now we'll just call it the 2000s or the millennial generation. And for us, our big mantra was we are the what generation? The me generation. Remember, you guys remember hearing that, right? In the 80s, it was the me generation. Everything was about me. It was about the individual, about your attainment, about who you are, about what you want. Go for the gusto. Do whatever you want to do, right? I mean, it was about personal fulfillment. Whereas this generation, I would call them the we generation. And I don't mean that in terms of video game systems, right?
Right.
That would be I. So what I mean by we is this generation really values community in a way that we've never understood it. That for us, it was all about just me and my own. Whereas them, they're really looking for ways to connect with each other. That we're seeing students that are crossing the groups with each other. Like for us, we had skater kids and, you know, your redneck kids and your athlete kids and your, you know, cheerleaders. Whereas them, they're really crossing over borders with each other because they're trying to figure out how do we really live together as people. And the other thing I think is different in this generation that's a really good thing that our generation didn't know how to address is that we had another mantra that we said all the time, and it was that you guys remember this? If it what? Do it. If it feels good, right? You guys remember that? Feels good, do it. And that was our big thing. Whereas this generation, they've changed it a little bit, and it's a, if it feels right. Now, and I know on the surface you're thinking, well, that's not too much of a difference. But what we meant by this, remember again, was that it was all about me. Right? I'm going to do what feels good to me, what gives me pleasure, what gives me fulfillment, what gives me money, gives me whatever I want. Whereas this generation, they're looking outside themselves. And what they mean by the word right is they're saying there are things in the world that are just they're not as they should be. And if I could use the words of Jesus in Matthew 6, when he's teaching the disciples to pray in the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, you know, your kingdom come on earth, your will be done as it is in heaven. Here on earth as it is in heaven. And what he's saying is that in heaven, things are pure, they are perfect, there is justice, it's rightness. And this generation of kids, they're seeing things in the world needs that they're thinking, I want to conquer those things. That we never had the mindset to look outside of ourselves or even look outside the church. And so they're doing things like, it's really the teen generation that have started so many of the nonprofits in the 2000s, things like Bloodwater Mission, or Invisible Children. And even here at your church, I was up late last night talking with Lance, because he's a youth guy and stays up late, and he was talking to me about the Waco mission that they went and did, and he was talking to me about the simulation, poverty simulation that they did, and I was really impressed, guys, with just how much that these student body here at Colonial is really looking outside the church walls. I mean, looking outside their school, outside this community, because they're saying there's something that's wrong in our culture, and we want to make it right.
Would you, let me just kind of interject this. Obviously, humanitarian causes, social causes is something that is much more on the forefront of our culture today, and maybe it's because of this up-and-coming generation. But when you make mention of the fact that if it feels right, do they have a standard for determining what is right?
Yeah, that's where things get kind of dicey.
Okay.
Because there is still some of that, we know there's a lot of brokenness. There's a lot of sin and dysfunction in this culture of the generation of students, just as it was in ours. Matter of fact, I would say there's even more brokenness in our culture, the sexualization of everything in our culture. But in a redeeming sense, I guess I'm looking at this more as, I think this is a real opportunity for the church, because I'm seeing students that aren't necessarily even redeemed students. They're just your run-of-the-mill kid at school that is they're really trying to find purpose, what gives their life meaning, and they're feeling an emptiness, they're feeling abandoned. Chap Clark, a sociologist, calls this the abandoned generation. And so they're feeling like, I have nothing, I don't know what I'm here for. And so trying to find something to give their life meaning, and they've really kind of rallied around this, that if I could do something outside myself, I'll have purpose. So I think this gives us an opportunity as a church to come alongside even those lost students that are trying to do a good thing and say to them, I know that thing inside of you that is telling you will give you purpose. I know his name. That thing that is causing you to do what is right, I know his name, and I can lead you to him.
Yeah. So